Anyway, we are going to be starting Revelation 12 today. Just as a heads up, this is, according to one of the guys I read, he says this is the central and pivotal chapter in the book of Revelation. So, and it's just full of stuff. It's crazy. So I don't know. My goal is for us to take chapters 12 and 13 and do those in 3 weeks. Break them into the 2 chapters into 3 weeks. But I don't know how far we'll get today in chapter 12. We're going to go as far as we can. We're going to try. We're going to do it right. We're going to make sure we're getting it as we go. And so we're going to be in Revelation 12 and a little bit of 13 to open up with. And we have to remember that one of the most crucial pieces of the puzzle when you're reading Revelation, or anything in the Bible, but Revelation specifically, is that we are, trying to get somewhere the lighting's not too weird, we need to try to hear it the way they heard it. Because the meaning that the text has cannot be significantly different than what the meaning the original hearers heard was. Okay? And one of the things that's huge that we haven't really dwelt on as much here is that includes the reality that they didn't hear it in itty-bitty pieces. When they got the book of Revelation, when it was delivered to the 7 churches, that was Sunday morning. Sunday morning was somebody got up and read the book to them. Chapter 1, verse 1 to chapter 22, however many verses are in 22. And it gives a very powerful message when you hear it read as a big picture. And so we have to make sure the big picture, what we hear in the big picture, that we carry that down into the details, instead of taking the details and then coming out with a big picture that never what they'd heard. So what I want to do is we haven't done this before, but I want to read all of chapter 12, and then I'm going to read just a touch of chapter 13, because there's not a break between chapters 12 and 13. It is one big section. And so I want to read all of chapter 12 and just a little bit of chapter 13, so you have the big picture. Okay? So let's just start chapter 12, Revelation, verse 1. A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its head. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that it might devour her child the moment he was born. But she gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. And her child was snatched up to God into his throne before the dragon could eat it. The woman fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven say, "Now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Messiah. For the accuser of our brothers and sisters, who accuses them before our God day and night, has been hurled down. They triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has gone down to you. He is filled with fury, because he knows that his time is short." And then just keep going right in chapter 13. The dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. It had 10 horns and 7 heads, and 10 crowns on its horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. And then we have about 10 verses of description of what this beast from the sea is doing. And then in verse 11 we come up, it says, "Then I saw a second beast coming out of the earth." One beast out of the sea, one beast out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. It exercised all the authority of the first beast on its behalf, and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast. So that's the big story, you see. And just to give you a couple things that you heard, because as you're hearing it, even if you have or don't have a lot of revelation, there were things that were just, okay, this is the big story. This is what I'm hearing, without any background knowledge, okay? Without much, at least. You see what's going on first. You see a big battle at the beginning. And the battle is God winning, okay? And God wins the battle. The devil is thrown to earth. God wins the battle on earth with the woman giving birth to the child, and God wins the battle in heaven and sweeps all of them out. And So we know that from this whole big story that evil isn't fighting to win. They've already lost. Okay? They've been swept completely out of heaven. We'll look at how thoroughly that is when we get there. But they're fighting for victory. Not fighting for victory. They're fighting out of vindictiveness. They're just mad and mean. This is mad and mean people fighting. Okay? And some of the images you heard, you had no trouble understanding, right? That dragon, it even says it's Satan, it's the devil. Okay, we got that one right there. We see the dragon and the two beasts, which reminds us pretty quickly about the Trinity, doesn't it? The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. There's this mock Trinity going on. There's setting up, and they're getting worshipped. And so there's this fake Trinity, this counterfeit going on. It's really clear that the son that the woman gives birth to is Jesus. I mean, there's just, we'll see the symbolism when we get there, the specifics, but it's obviously Jesus. And the woman, we'll talk about her when we get there in just a second, okay? So, now let's talk about this story. Let's talk about it in some detail, and we'll start out by, okay, what did they hear? What did the original people hear? What jumped out at them? One thing is, that we need to get is that story wasn't weird to them. To us, that's weird. There's a dragon, there's people chasing it, this is strange. That's not weird to them. I'll tell you why in just a second. Also, we have to make sure we're focused on what they heard. Because throughout history, what the church has tended to do, what Christians have tended to do, is to take these stories in the Bible, apply them directly to what's right around them, and come up with answers. And then those answers make no sense. They made no sense pushed back to the original hearers, and they make no sense to us either. You go back, 800 years or so, the interpreters viewed the sun that the woman's around as the church, as the Christian world. The moon is the Islamic world, because that was when the big, all the crusades were happening. And the war with the saints was the Pope taking on a couple of splinter groups that had splintered off from the Catholic Church. And that's how interpreters saw it, in terms of the Catholic Church taking care of these two splinter groups and the Muslim world at the same time. So obviously that's not there. So we have to look at it culturally, we have to look at it biblically. And then one more piece we have to bring into play that is we have to give our brains a twist, because we don't think this way. We very clearly differentiate between the natural and the supernatural. Okay? We think of, matter of fact, there's a lot of people around today who deny the supernatural, don't even believe it exists. And those of us who believe it exists view it as this separate realm. It's very, very different from us. That's not how they viewed things. They viewed the two as perfectly intertwined at all times. Matter of fact, in Ephesians 6, Paul's pointing something directly to us. He says, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." So there is this battle that is occurring in the spiritual and the natural realm at the same time, and the two are intertwined. It's not two big separate things. And that's really, I think, it gives us a really cool perspective. I'm not going to say it's the key to understanding it, because somebody might disagree with me on that, how I would view this instead. But it's like everything is turning on where the spiritual, supernatural, and the natural are working at the same time. And we'll see that, I think, very clearly in a little bit. Now, like I said, the story that he tells about the dragon chasing the pregnant woman, that's odd. You've not even seen that in a movie, have you? In those days, it was one of the more common stories. Just about every culture had a version of that story. The most common one for most of these people, as I pour my water out, good thing I'm outside, in the Greek version of the story, there is this huge dragon named Python, okay? And Python is told in an oracle that this woman named Leto, not the shuffle, not the Leto shuffle, it's L-E-T-O. That was Tim, I know you went there. The Leto shuffle, Leto's children, one of Leto's children is going to kill him. So the dragon is told that one of Leto's children will kill him. So he goes after her, and she's pregnant with actually twins from the god Zeus, who you may have heard of, right? And then she gives birth to two sons, Artemis and Apollo, who you've also heard of. And then Python is chasing her with the two children to destroy her offspring. But then the north wind, named Aquilo, comes along and rescues her, carries her away. And then Poseidon uses the waves of the sea to protect her, and she's protected. And then when Apollo is 4 days old, he's a god, he can do things like this, he hunts down and kills Python. So you've got the dragon chasing the pregnant woman into the wilderness. Remember, we just read, if you may remember this part, there's a part where the dragon is attacking the woman, and the earth actually swallows up the water and protects her. So this is very much a story they were used to. You go to Egypt, and Isis, who you probably heard of the god Isis, and she's the one with the sun on her head, and she gives birth to Horus, and a red dragon named Typhon tries to slay her. Okay, and she escapes, and her son overthrows the dragon. The Ugarites, another country nationality back then, had a Baal story like this one. The Persians had the son of Ahura fighting the evil dragon Dahakra, whatever. You can look it up if you want to know the name, how to pronounce it. And then the Babylonians had a story of their god Marduk, which fit right into this thing. Matter of fact, Marduk's mother is depicted very similar to how the woman is depicted in 12:1, where in the battle that she's said to throw down a third of the stars, just like happened. And so it's a very common story. Matter of fact, it's so common that the Roman emperors tended to take that story. Remember, the Roman emperor, because the natural and supernatural were all blended, the Roman emperors would freely pull from that stuff and claim to be that, especially Apollo. Apollo is the one who destroys the dragon. They would present themselves as the fulfillment of this prophecy. They're the ones who are out destroying dragons. Okay, they're Apollo. Now, ironically, for the first hearers, when they hear this story, the dragon is the Roman Empire. That was the first dragon, or at least in their brains, that's the first dragon. And so that's the first place they would associate with it. So we've got this story that everybody knows that John has reinvented the story. It's almost like some of the hymn writers in the 1800s would take existing song lyrics and write song music, existing tunes, secular tunes, and write Christian lyrics. So he takes this existing story and repurposes it, and reimagines it, and makes it a telling of what's been going on in the church or in the world with the church. Okay, so let's get ready to start reading it slowly. I told you it might take us a week or two to get through this. Okay, so we start out, and I'm going to make it 3 words before I stop. Okay, a great sign appeared in heaven. Now that's not how John has been telling this story. This is very different from an opening. Normally, if you remember, it's usually he sees. John says, I looked and I saw. Frequently someone would say something. Someone would make a noise, would make a sound, or make an announcement, and John would look and he would see. And that's the normal thing. John, the person, the individual, he looks and he's the only one who sees. This uses the word semeion, or sign. And it's John loves the word sign. He uses it in his Gospels all the time to talk about miracles. A lot of the miracles are signs. And a sign is something that is public. It is something that other people see. In John chapter 2, verse 18, the Jews responded to Jesus, what sign, what semeion can you show us to prove your authority to do all this? And later in that chapter, John 2, verse 23, while he was in Jerusalem at the Passover festival, many people saw the signs he was performing and believed in his name. So this sign that he's seeing, it's not just John seeing it. It's a sign, it's a symbol, and it's a powerful symbol that other people see. And I think, I'm not going to be dogmatic about this, I think what he's saying is, you have seen this first part of the story told. This is not, what you're about to hear, the first section of this, is past tense. A lot of commentators think that this section here is primarily past tense. A lot of them think that it moves into a more present tense, describing where the people are right now, and then moves into a future tense as we go through this story in chapters 12 and 13, and maybe even into 14. But this is probably, I'm going to be strong with this. I'm going to say probably, almost certainly, this is past tense. This what we're about to read, this first part, is something that's already happening, and he is retelling it using the story that they're familiar with. And you'll see why I say that when you see it. You go, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. Okay. By the way, these signs can be used for good or for bad. Later on in the book, the beasts are going to present signs to convince people. Signs are public things that convince people, all right? Now let's go ahead and see if we can do all of verse 1. You ready to do a whole verse? Okay. A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. And so there's this woman, and there's some allusion to Joseph in Genesis 37, because Joseph has a dream about his family, and it has a lot of these symbols in it. But more to the point, this woman represents the people of God throughout history. That's very. Some people think she's just the Jews. No, I think it's the entire people of God throughout history. And it doesn't really matter how you want to, if you want to quibble over that or not. For the biggest thing is, she has 12 stars on her head, and as we've seen in this book, 12 is the number of the people of God. John is huge on numbers. You can go back and listen to all the stuff we've done so far at stuffstevesays.com, and we've had times where we've talked a lot about numbers, and 12 is the number of the people of God, going all the way back to the Old Testament, working through the 12 tribes of Israel, working into the New Testament with the 12 disciples, and it just moves forward. The people of God are 12. That is our number. Whether it's the Jewish or the Christian. Matter of fact, this is one I've told you before, but just as a reminder how important it is. Jesus appointed 12 disciples. When Judas betrays Jesus and then kills himself, they have to appoint another disciple to get it back to 12. Okay, because 12 is the number, okay? It's the number of God's people. She's also wearing a crown, which is the victory wreath. It's the Stephanos crown, the Steve crown, from Greeks, where they would wear that when they won the Olympic Games. And here's the thing. The child is the center of this story, we'll see. And the child, everything revolves around this child. So whether you're Jew or whether you're Christian in this thing, the question is, are you revolving around God? Okay? John believes that since Jesus is Israel's Messiah, Israel is redefined around him, just like the church is defined around him. So the important thing in history is, where is Jesus? And what is surrounding him, those are the people of God. Matter of fact, if you want to get it, she is us. Okay, she is the people of God. We are now the people of God. We're in this story, okay? So, verse 2, let's do 2 verses, okay? Verse 2 and 3. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared, another something you can see, okay? Heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its head. Now, you've already seen, this is the enemy. This is Satan. This is the devil. But here's the number part. Notice how she had the 12, which was the people of God. This one has the number 10. And 10 is always used in regard to the opponents of God. Anytime you see the number 10 in the book of Revelation, it's always about the opponents of God. Now, if you look at it, it's 7 heads, 10 horns, 7 crowns. What's the number 7? 7's the number of completion. Now, we don't even hit all the time 7 gets used in the book of Revelation. I skip over probably half of them, because it is incredibly common for there to be 7 uses of a word in a chapter, in one story. There'll be 7 times this happens. This phrase gets used. It's over and over and over, the number 7. And 7 is the number of completion. Okay? Throughout this book, 7 means it's complete. So we've got the number basically for opponents, for evil, the number 10. Okay? Surrounded by 7 heads, 10 horns, 7 crowns. 7, 10, 7. It's an evil sandwich. Okay, it's completion. Evil is completed in this dragon. Okay, it is found its complete fulfillment in the dragon. That's a bad dude. Okay, and just one little piece culturally, the dragon is wearing crowns on his head. Okay, now there's the Stephanos crown the woman was wearing. Okay, the kind of victory from the Olympics. Then there's the diadem crown, the crown of authority. And Roman emperors wouldn't wear a crown. You notice in the pictures, if you go back to all the pictures, the statues and the paintings, they're always wearing the wreath of victory, the Stephanos crown. Because the crown, the diadem, was associated with the Roman Empire before. Well, I forget what it's called. But there was a very tyrannical rulership in Rome before we get to the Caesars. Because under the Caesars, it was somewhat democratic in the way they ran things. Prior to that, it was a very tyrannical government. Those leaders wore crowns because they were the tyrants. And the Roman emperors, because they were those guys had been such tyrants, would not wear crowns. They only wore the Stephanos, the victory crowns. Okay? But the dragon is arrogant, and he wears the crown of tyranny. Okay? Now, then verse 4. We're cruising right along here, folks. We're all the way to verse 4. Okay? The dragon's tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to earth. And I really wanted this not to be a third of the angels. That's what it is. Those stars are symbolic of angels throughout so many places in the Bible and throughout here. And it lines up with 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4. Talks about, for if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but sent them to hell, putting them in chains and darkness to be held for judgment. There is a judgment that has occurred, and in the battle that has occurred in heaven, the dragon's tail sweeps a third. Now I don't know how literal that is, whether it just means that, because a third of the stars get darkened. So the numbers are rarely specific. They're more about the numbers are more about their symbols than they are about their specificity. Okay, I mean, throughout the book of Revelation, they're going to use 7. If he can use 7, he's going to use 7 because it means completion. If he's going to have evil, it's going to have a 10 because that's about 10. If it's about the church, it's going to have a 12, or a 12 times 12, which gets us 144, or 12 times 12 times 10 times, not 12 times 12 times 1,000, which is 144,000. So he's the symbology is so crucial here. And so that third is swept out of heaven. So there's the angels that follow him. And then we keep our story going. Notice this story is just following the other story. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth so that it might devour her child the moment he was born. Excuse me. And that's something that has happened. It happened, I think the most specific example of this is when Jesus is born. Herod knows that he's been born in Bethlehem during a time frame, and Herod sends the soldiers to wipe out all the children who are of a certain age so he can kill this potential rival, this potential king of Israel, right? So that's very common. That's probably the most explicit case where the dragon is trying to destroy the children. Evil is trying to destroy Messiah. But it's something that occurs throughout the Bible. You're going to find this throughout the Bible. One of the ones I think of first is a woman named Athaliah. And Athaliah is found in one of the books of Kings. And Athaliah is the mother of a legitimate king of Israel. Now, the kings of Judah, the southern kingdom, the authentic kingdom. And we've got, the line goes, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, their kids, the 12 children, then all the way down, and hits David, and then the promise is given to King David that his offspring will sit on the throne. And so there's an authentic line that has to lead to Messiah. And Athaliah marries into the family, has a son who is the king, okay? And he's authentic, but then he dies, and when he dies, she sees an opportunity, and she sets out to kill all the sons of all heirs. She sets out to kill everyone who's an heir to the throne of David, which would have stopped Messiah. But God steps in. There is one child saved. That child goes up to be one of the best kings of Israel, of Judah. And so, anyway, so this is what's going on. So the dragon is poised to kill the offspring of the woman. Not going to work that way. She gives birth to a son, a male child. And that flips us back to Isaiah 7. You know this one. Behold, the virgin will conceive, give birth to a son, and we'll call him Emmanuel. Okay? And this is pointing back there. And then it says that he will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. And I could read this, but I've read it a bunch of times. That's Psalm 2. Psalm 2 is a very messianic psalm. And it's the one who holds the iron scepter, rules the nation with an iron scepter, is Messiah. So this woman has given birth to Messiah. Messiah is Jesus. This one's easy. No sense spending a lot of time on it. And now we've got a problem because the dragon is set out to kill Messiah, to destroy Messiah. And what you're expecting next is a battle. Okay? That's what I would be. Remember, because Apollo chases down Python and kills him with arrows. So that's how the story normally goes. But they subvert it, and it says, and her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. She has birthed a child, he snatched up. The entire life of Christ on earth is summarized in that line. Her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. He just skips everything and goes straight to the fact that Jesus lives his life and he is ascended. Okay, he immediately ascends, and that ascension, I believe, starts with the cross. The ascension is not just when he goes to heaven finally. He is in John 12:31 and 33. Jesus says, "Now is time for judgment in this world. Now the prince of the world will be driven out." Prince of the world, the dragon, driven out. "And when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself." And he said this to show what kind of death he was going to die. So when Jesus is lifted up, he begins his ascension. There's a brief stop off for 3 days where he has to go into a tomb and actually come back out again resurrected, and then he takes some time. But it's one smooth motion, the way that John describes it. The baby is born, and God brings him to heaven, to the throne. The throne means power, rulership, authority. Jesus immediately becomes onto the throne, okay? And so, anyway, now let's go ahead and get verse 6 in at least. Okay, "The woman fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days." And now the symbol, there are some symbols in the Bible that are so profound and deep that you can see them almost constantly in the Bible. And possibly the biggest one, other than maybe even bigger than Messiah in some areas, because it leads to it, is the Egyptian Exodus, the Exodus from Egypt, when Moses led the Israelites out across the Red Sea into the wilderness. And you'll see the woman fled into the wilderness, okay, to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of. And so the woman has gotten free. Oh man, I wanted to get farther than this. Anyway, so the woman has escaped. Okay, God has rescued her to a place prepared by God. But the story's not over. We've still got battle to go. But the next thing happens. We're not going to go to. We'll do this next week. The next thing that happens is that now the battle shifts to heaven. It shifts from earth, where the earthly battle is, where the woman's in a safe place. It shifts to the battle in heaven. And I'll just spoiler alert. I think what follows is the other angle, the retelling of this same story from the heavenly perspective. I think the two things are sound. Here's what I think. I think the cross is the centerpiece of creation and history. I think the cross is the middle. Everything joins at the cross. It all comes together at the cross. And so while Jesus is, and this is just my opinion, and I'm kind of a sci-fi guy, so I apologize if this is too weird for you. I think that tied to the cross is the battle in heaven. That the battle in heaven is being waged with, as we'll see, Michael the archangel, and it's being waged by Jesus on the cross, and everything is centered on that, and they are, in a sense, simultaneous. Now, whether the time works out, I don't know. But anyway, we'll talk about that next week. Thank you for sticking with me for 6 whole verses in the book of Revelation chapter 12, and we'll see if we can do much, much more next week. All right, have a great week.